If I drop this bottle cap here, it ends up here by the Long Island Sound because it was in a watershed. Hi, I'm Christina.
And I'm Tim.
You might be wondering what a watershed is. At first you might think it's a shed of water, but let's break that word down. We all know what water is, but what's it mean to shed? To give off, like a dog or a cat would shed their fur. When we put those two words together, a watershed is an area of land where the water will drain or shed off into one major body of water.
Every piece of land is a part of a watershed. The watershed collects rain and snowmelt and funnels it into small bodies of waters like streams and rivers. Those small bodies of water enter larger ones like lakes, bays, and oceans. In addition to water being stored above the ground, there's also water below the surface and being stored there as well. If you're standing on land on planet Earth, you can almost guarantee that you're standing in a watershed. That watershed may be for a body of water like a pond or a lake or another small body of water, but these smaller watersheds often make up pieces of larger ones. If we look in the shaded area on the map, we can see the size of Long Island Sound's watershed. It's also made up of smaller watersheds. We're going to focus on three of its larger ones, which are three of its main rivers that together contribute 90% of its fresh water. The first of these rivers is the Housatonic. It's a nearly 150-mile long river that enters the sound between Stratford and Milford. Its headwaters are in the Berkshire Mountains near Pittsfield, Massachusetts. Its watershed is nearly 2,000 square miles, making it larger than the Long Island Sound. The next of our rivers is the Thames River. This is a 16-mile river that enters Long Island Sound at New London and begins in Norwich, Connecticut, at the junction of two other rivers, the Housatonic and the Yantic. The tributary of these rivers extend into parts of Massachusetts as well as Rhode Island. This watershed is 1,500 square miles, making it also larger than Long Island Sound. The last of our rivers, and the largest, is the Connecticut River. This is a nearly 410-mile long river that begins on the border of Quebec, Canada, and New Hampshire. This enormous river begins through a series of lakes and flows steadily downhill, becoming the border of Vermont and New Hampshire, passing through Massachusetts before ultimately leaving through Connecticut at Old Saybrook. Along its long journey, it passes through many major cities like Springfield, Massachusetts, and our own state capital, Hartford. Nearly 2 million people live in its span. It provides 70% of Long Island Sound's fresh water, and it's an over 11,000 square mile watershed. It's extremely important for many species of animals that live and breed in it. In addition to our main three rivers that contribute fresh water, the Pakituk River begins in Rhode Island and flows into the Sound, tying part of Rhode Island into our watershed. There's also several smaller rivers that contribute to fresh water, including our own rivers in Stamford, like the Rippewam River and the Mianus River. The Long Island Sound also receives fresh water from the land in high-density locations like the Bronx in New York City and the entire North Shore of Long Island. As well as all of the freshwater sources entering Long Island Sound, the Atlantic Ocean also enters the Sound. Both types of freshwater and saltwater from the Atlantic mix together, creating brackish water in the very unique Long Island Sound watershed.
As Tim just explained, there's a large amount of fresh water that flows into Long Island Sound. I want to tell you about another type of fresh water that also has a strong influence.
Earth has a lot of water on it, but only 2.5% of Earth's total water is fresh water. This fresh water can be broken down into several biomes, including ponds and lakes, streams, wetlands, and rivers. These biomes are all visible on the surface of the Earth, hence why they're called surface water. This graph breaks down what types of water and how much of it can be found on Earth. Oceans make up 96.5% of Earth's total water. That doesn't leave a large percent for freshwater. If we look at the top of our bar graph here, freshwater only makes up 2.5% of Earth's total water. Let's take a closer look at what makes up freshwater on Earth. We can see that glaciers and ice caps make up most of our fresh water at 68.7%. And surface water, such as the lakes and streams we talked about before, make up 1.2%. The middle part of the freshwater bar graph shows that groundwater makes up 30.1%. What exactly is groundwater? Take a look at this illustration of how precipitation and surface water become groundwater. Groundwater can start as rain or snow that falls to the ground. Only a small amount of this precipitation actually becomes groundwater, however. Most of the rain and snow will run off the land into surface water, such as the stream on our illustration here. Some will be used by plants, and some will evaporate. The remaining precipitation will seep into the soil and become groundwater. This remaining precipitation that has become groundwater fills spaces underground between rock, soil, and other sediments. These rocks and sediments that store groundwater are called aquifers. In order to access groundwater in an aquifer, a well, such as the ones shown here, must be created by drilling a hole that reaches the aquifer. A well contains a pump that pushes groundwater up from the earth below to the surface. While wells are man-made forms of bringing groundwater to the surface, aquifers also release groundwater naturally into streams, lakes, and oceans. Groundwater is used for many reasons: industrial, agriculture, and as well as in our homes. Most groundwater, including a significant amount of our drinking water, comes from aquifers. Aquifers naturally filter groundwater by forcing it to pass through small pores in between sediments. However, a threat to groundwater is pollution. If we take a look at our illustration here, it's showing us the contaminants that can get into our groundwater. For example, waste from manufacturing plants, pesticides, gasoline leaks, sewage and waste runoff, and so on. Groundwater is everywhere beneath the soil surface and can be ever present in many places if allowed to recharge. Even in dry conditions, it maintains the flow of rivers and streams by replenishing them, providing a valuable substitute for precipitation. This makes groundwater one of the world's most important natural resources.
Did you know groundwater played such an influential role in the health of the watershed? Here's Tim again to explain how people and communities keep the watershed in good health.
Now that we have a better understanding of what a watershed is and the size of the Long Island Sound watershed, you can kind of imagine that the impact that humans have on it. The Long Island Sound watershed includes 6 states: Connecticut, Massachusetts, New York, Rhode Island, Vermont, and New Hampshire, and 2 countries, the United States, and just a small piece of Canada. This is nearly 17,000 square miles of land that can impact the water quality in Long Island Sound. This land also includes parts of one of the largest cities in the world, New York City. Just under 9 million people live in the land area that affects the watershed. If we look at this same image at night, we can see the nearly 600 miles of coastline of Long Island Sound are densely populated based on the amount of lights that are in the area. We can also see that as we travel north through the middle of Connecticut, there's a strong stream of lights. Those lights also follow water, the Connecticut River. The idea is humans like being around water, and those humans impact the water that they live around. In order to keep a watershed the size of the Long Island Sound clean, it requires work on many different levels. Individuals, organizations, cities, states, and the federal government all play important roles in creating a healthier watershed for everyone. As individuals, we can do small things to impact our watershed on a very local level, like participating in a beach cleanup. We could also do things like install a rain garden. This one is at Rogers International School in Stamford, Connecticut. These can also have an enormous impact on the quality of water here. A rain garden is a small depression in the land with native plants in it. It does the important job of taking water that runs off surfaces like roads and rooftops, as well as other surfaces that can absorb water and may carry pollutants. By having a rain garden, that water is collected and stored and ideally keeps pollutants from entering other local bodies of water. Organizations can also play a major role in impacting our watershed. In the winter, SoundWaters farms kelp. The kelp does the important job of collecting harmful nitrogen in the water. When the kelp is removed at the end of the growing season, the nitrogen leaves with it. That same kelp can then be used as food, fertilizer, or a feed additive for animals like cows and sheep to help reduce their harmful methane emissions. Cities can also undergo projects that can have a positive impact on the Long Island Sound. A recent example is the Connecticut city of New Haven at the dammed up West River that enters Long Island Sound. This dam kept fish from swimming upriver to breed, and the habitat around the dam was severely degraded. Dams also prevent sediment from moving downstream and created buildup and flooding. The removal of the dam created a now healthy and thriving section of river that is surrounded by native plants. This project happened over 4 miles away from the Long Island Sound, but the work that was done here will have a positive impact on the quality of water in the Long Island Sound. The state and federal government often team up to improve the watershed. In Stratford, Connecticut, the Great Meadows Marsh Unit is the largest salt marsh complex in the state of Connecticut and home to many unique threatened plants and animals. It was heavily impacted by the Remington Gun Club at Lordship Point and Raymark Industries. The Remington Gun Club operated from 1920 to 1986 and is estimated to have fired 4.8 million pounds of lead into the water. In addition to the lead, millions of clay targets that were used for shooting practice also entered the water here. Raymark Industries was largely an automotive parts manufacturer and contaminated the water with PCBs and heavy metals such as zinc, copper, and lead. Raymark closed its doors in 1988 and the site was cleaned. Funds of $526,000 and $218,000 were settled from both Raymark and the Remington Gun Club respectively. A previous $300,000 settlement from General Electric has been added to this money for just over a total of $1 million to have a restoration on the Great Meadows Marsh Unit. The Connecticut Department of Energy and Environmental Protection partnered with NOAA and the United States Fish and Wildlife Services to develop a plan and implement that plan. The collaborative effort of government on several levels will lead to a cleaner watershed and a healthier Long Island Sound.
Watersheds are more than just drainage areas. It's home to many plants, animals, and provides most of our drinking water. We all live downstream from freshwater environments, so our everyday activities can have an impact on our watershed. Now that you understand how a watershed works, you know how a bottle cap dropped on the street can end up in the Long Island Sound.